All right, let's find out the opposition's take on all this. The Shadow Treasurer Joe Hockey joined me in our Sydney studio just a short time ago. Mr Hockey, the Prime Minister Kevin Rudd was on the 7:30 report earlier this evening and he pointed out that Australia remains one of the top 5 economies among the advanced economies of the world. Do you agree with him that these figures today show that Australia is doing comparatively well?
Well, of course. And Australia did comparatively well when we last had 7 out of our top 10 trading partners in recession during the Asian financial crisis. In fact, we had one of the fastest growing economies in the developed world. The fact is that the Prime Minister's rhetoric today has briefly, for a moment, changed, because in the same interview he said that we're being hit by a cyclone on a number of occasions. And this apocalyptic language from the Prime Minister is doing huge damage to the psyche of the Australian consumer and the psyche of Australian business.
If you agree that Australia is doing comparatively well, then why all the criticism of the stimulus package?
Well, if Australia is doing comparatively well, why did the Prime Minister say back in October it's going to be bad, really bad? It's going to be ugly. They're his words. And then he gave another apocalyptic scenario in the Parliament in February, saying there's a cyclone ripping through the world, creating damage, wreaking havoc on families. And that was a justification for the second stimulus package. And you see, the Prime Minister is hell-bent on a political strategy. His political strategy is, in a year and a half, he wants to say, hang on, guys, it's not my fault. It's the fault of the rest of the world. And in the process of doing that, he's causing untold damage to the Australian economy with his apocalyptic rhetoric and the fact that he is constantly talking everything down.
So are you saying that despite these figures today, which were worse than everyone expected, that it's not as bad as it looks?
No, I'm saying we're realistic about the situation, but we believe that the leaders of this country need to have a message of hope, a message of confidence. Take a leaf out of President Obama's book, even take a leaf out of Prime Minister Gordon Brown's book, and talk about how we are going to get out of it. Lay down a plan for Australia's economic recovery. Simply do not run a commentary on where the rest of the world is at and how bad it is for Australians.
On the need for this message that builds hope and confidence, Malcolm Turnbull said a similar thing today. In a matter of minutes before he said that, he warned that the Labor government is, through its policies, damaging the Australian economy, undermining our prospects and costing Australian jobs. Isn't there a fundamental inconsistency here in the coalition message where you're talking about the need to build confidence, but then yourselves painting this doomsday scenario?
No, not at all. Let me explain this. It's a pretty simple equation. With the Prime Minister, if you are in any way critical of his government, you are somehow talking everything down. With the Prime Minister, if you are critical of something that the Governor of the Reserve Bank has stated, you are somehow challenging the independence of the Reserve Bank. Hopefully we are more mature than that in our economic debates.
But if you're talking
Hopefully we're more mature in our political debates. But any criticism of Kevin Rudd or the behaviour of his government and this massive spending spree on a scale that is, even by the Reserve Bank's own admissions, larger than any other comparable country. We've gone further, harder, earlier than any other comparable country, and today we got a negative economic result, growth result for the December quarter. You say to yourself, what on earth is this government doing?
All right, on this issue of confidence, Malcolm Turnbull said today, that quote, as I said to you before, that Labor was damaging Australia's economy and costing Australians jobs. Can you please give me some examples of where it's costing jobs?
Well, the starting point is that the government said, with its $10 billion cash splash, it would create 75,000 new jobs.
That's not what I'm asking about. I'm asking, you said, the coalition said today that it's costing Australian jobs. It's costing Australian jobs. Where are those jobs being lost?
I'll give you the classic example. Pacific Brands, 1,850 workers. Now,
Kevin Rudd... That wasn't due to the Rudd government stimulus package. No, they said that was due to business being cheaper to be done overseas.
Well, if I can just finish. Kevin Rudd's own treasurer said it was a socks and jocks stimulus package. He said, as a justification for spending $10 billion borrowed from our children, before Christmas last year, there's been a surge in socks and jock sales. Pacific Brands, if that had been the case, and that was going to continue, Pacific Brands would have kept their operations in Australia. But the fact of the matter is, when you lose confidence about the domestic market, when you lose confidence in your own country, you look for a cheaper producer. And it was cheaper for Pacific Brands to produce in China.
But that example that you used, the textile industry has been having problems for years and years. Pacific Brands would have been making decisions about its future well before the Rudd government stimulus packages came into effect. So I don't see how that backs your example that the Rudd government's policies are costing Australian jobs.
Well, I mean, let's go to another example. The unlimited government guarantee of bank deposits. Unquestionably, those people operating mortgage trusts, cash management trusts where the assets have been frozen have laid off staff. And why? Because there is no liquidity in the market. There's no transactions of any great substance in the market. And why? Because the government put an unlimited guarantee on bank deposits at a time when they should have had a limited guarantee, and the Reserve Bank governor himself was saying the lower the better, and Malcolm Turnbull suggested a $100,000 guarantee. So that is another example. But look, Leigh, the fundamental point is this. The government, by their own projections, is saying 300,000 people will lose their jobs. Today, Kevin Rudd hoisted up the white flag when he said Australia can no longer swim against the tide. It was a damning statement. The Prime Minister of Australia today gave up on the country's ability to survive the economic downturn.
So are you saying that Australia could reasonably be expected to survive the global forces that have put nearly every other Western economy in the world into a recession?
Well, there's no reason to believe that Australia cannot outperform most other countries, and as we did during the Asian financial crisis, when 7 out of our top 10 trading partners were in recession or even depression. In one case, during the Asian financial crisis, Australia had a strong growth rate. Today, the Prime Minister has said, I give up. We can't swim against this tide. Well, that defeatist language, that attitude of, well, I'm just overcome by global forces, that attitude, it's like a dagger to the heart of small business. It's giving up on those self-funded retirees that are struggling at the moment, have frozen funds, have had massive asset devaluations, and Kevin Rudd today indicated he is walking away from those people.
All right, the cheques for the Rudd government's second stimulus package are due to start going out next week. There's still time for the government to call that off, should they?
Well, I think it's probably too late, and that's because a lot of families out there would have already committed to some form of spending or saving on the basis of the passage of the legislation through the Parliament.
You're so opposed to this package that you say it's costing Australian jobs, it's undermining our prospects. Shouldn't they call it off if that's your position?
Well, if the government were to say it would have no impact on the community to call it off, we wouldn't have a problem with that, because from our perspective, having these cash splashes is a bad investment. It's bad. It's too large. It's badly targeted. Can you imagine, Ben Chifley giving every family £50 instead of building the Snowy Mountain scheme, or Menzies and a succession of Prime Ministers saying, no, we're not going to build universities, we're not going to build the Pacific Highway or the Hume Highway, and we're not going to build electricity generation, we're just going to give everyone a cash payment instead. That's exactly what Kevin Rudd is doing writ large, and it's having a huge impact on our children's future, because it means that they will have to pay the bills.
All right, a final question. The Treasury forecast for unemployment is 7%. We just spoke to Chris Richardson from Access Economics, and he says that's too low. As the Shadow Treasurer, what's your assessment of the likely direction of the unemployment figures?
Well, clearly unemployment is rising, but Kevin Rudd and Wayne Swan are making it worse. Because their rhetoric their rhetoric to the message they are sending small business in particular, when they talk about it being bad, about being ugly, about a cyclone ripping through the economy.
I want to know your assessment of where it's going.
My assessment is that people will lose their jobs.
How much worse than 7%?
Look, every job loss is a bad job loss, and the tragedy is that under our government, 2 million jobs were created in Australia by business. Kevin Rudd doesn't understand. Government doesn't create jobs, business creates jobs. And if you undermine business confidence, if you undermine consumer confidence, they're not going to continue to employ people.
Joe Hockey, thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Leigh.